shadows stretch across Mexico's northern frontier as a silent empire rises, forged through fear, loyalty, and unending rivers of cash. What began as a small trafficking corridor soon evolved into a machine of power that shaped politics, ignited wars, and rewrote the rules of the underworld. Its name whispered everywhere: the Sinaloa Cartel. In the late 20th century, as Mexico's northern deserts stretched open under relentless heat, new trade routes quietly took shape along forgotten roads and border towns. These paths, once used by farmers and small-time smugglers, began to attract the attention of men who understood the value of geography better than most governments did. Among them were figures who would one day shape an organization that expanded far beyond any single region, merging networks, alliances, and shifting loyalties into a structure that operated with the discipline of a multinational corporation. The foundation of this rise lay in the plazas of Sinaloa, where families entrenched in rural life had long survived through resourcefulness and an instinct for opportunity in a country where the state's reach often faltered. As the United States intensified its efforts to limit South American distribution channels in the 1980s, the landscape changed rapidly. Pressure on Caribbean routes forced Colombian suppliers to seek more reliable partners on the Mexican mainland. The shift created a rare opening, and those positioned along Mexico's northern rim recognized that controlling transit pathways meant controlling the future. Sinaloan intermediaries, once minor players, evolved into essential brokers. Through connections forged in the rugged Sierra Madre terrain, a network began to solidify, linking small growers to transporters and transporters to negotiators who understood that consistency in supply was just as valuable as force. The early structure relied not on centralized command, but on partnerships rooted in long-standing regional relationships. Individuals like Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, operating from the remnants of the Guadalajara network, understood the strength of unity when external pressure intensified. Under his influence, corridors were divided, responsibilities were assigned, and an informal balance was maintained among various groups who managed different stretches of territory. Sinaloa's future leaders operated within this environment, watching how alliances were formed and how survival depended on adaptation rather than confrontation. When the Guadalajara network fractured at the end of the decade, the old order collapsed almost overnight. Arrests, disputes, and government pressure scattered its members, leaving vast stretches of territory suddenly open for control. Out of this rupture emerged new factions, each claiming lineage from the same roots, but diverging in methods and ambitions. Among these rising figures were individuals with deep familiarity of mountain routes, border crossings, and the economics of trafficking that had grown increasingly sophisticated. These individuals recognized that the coming era demanded more than brute strength. It required logistics, intelligence gathering, and the capacity to manage relationships across continents. By the 1990s, the group that would come to be known internationally as the Sinaloa Cartel began organizing its operations with remarkable cohesion. Rather than depending on a single leader, the network operated through cooperative arrangements among key figures who oversaw distinct sectors. Some supervised transportation corridors along Sonora, Chihuahua, and Baja California. Others managed supply chains stretching from the Pacific coast to the Andean region, where long-standing connections with producers ensured stability. Still others handled financial operations, ensuring that revenue flowed through legitimate businesses, real estate, and foreign investments that obscured the origins of profit. As international demand grew, So did the sophistication of the operation. The group diversified its transportation techniques, shifting from rudimentary smuggling methods to systems that mirrored state-level planning. Tunnels were engineered with surprising precision beneath border towns, while air routes adapted to patterns designed to evade surveillance. Maritime shipments increased along the Pacific coast, where fishing vessels and commercial ships blended into regular trade activity. Each innovation demonstrated the group's ability to predict and counter law enforcement strategies, operating with a flexibility that created persistent challenges for authorities on both sides of the border. Government responses fluctuated with political changes, but pressure escalated through bilateral initiatives designed to dismantle major organized networks. As enforcement intensified, the Sinaloa organization strengthened its alliances abroad. South American producers depended heavily on its reliability, while European and Asian markets increasingly turned to its distribution capabilities. Through these partnerships, the group developed a global footprint that extended far beyond the boundaries of Mexico, transforming it from a regional collective into one of the most influential trafficking networks of the modern era. Within Mexico, territorial control required continuous negotiation. Rather than seeking open conflict, the Sinaloa structure often relied on intermediaries, agreements with local groups, and calculated movements that prioritized stability over disruption. This approach allowed the organization to maintain influence even during periods when rival factions rose in strength across the country. In border cities such as Tijuana, Nogales, and Ciudad Juarez, the balance of power shifted repeatedly. Yet the Sinaloa network sustained its position through patience, strategic alliances, and an understanding that long-term endurance mattered more than immediate dominance. As leadership figures became more visible, international attention intensified. High-profile arrests reshaped the hierarchy, forcing the organization to evolve once again. Yet decentralization remained its most resilient advantage. When one leader fell, others absorbed responsibilities without major structural collapse. The network's compartmentalized design reduced vulnerability, allowing it to withstand waves of enforcement actions that crippled less organized groups. Even as governments invested heavily in intelligence, surveillance, and cross-border coordination, the organization adapted faster than many anticipated, continuously adjusting its routes, communication systems, and financial channels. Throughout the early 2000s, the rise of competing groups triggered a new era of instability across Mexico, as rival networks sought to challenge long-established corridors. The Sinaloa organization responded by strengthening its alliances while expanding operations into regions previously dominated by other factions. Internal cohesion played a critical role. Veteran members who had observed the collapse of earlier networks understood the value of maintaining structure amid regional upheaval. Their experience in logistics, negotiation, and international trade allowed them to navigate a landscape increasingly shaped by government intervention and escalating rivalries. Despite internal pressures and heightened scrutiny, the group's influence continued to spread through innovation in production and distribution. Laboratories emerged in remote regions where authorities struggled to establish a presence. Supply chains became increasingly diversified, and distribution networks expanded into markets where demand continued to climb. Financial operations grew more complex as revenue streams were woven into global commerce, making it increasingly difficult for investigators to trace the flow of funds. As the decade progressed, the organization's leadership became the subject of intense global attention, with law enforcement agencies dedicating unprecedented resources to tracking key figures. Major arrests captured headlines around the world, yet each effort revealed the depth of the network's structure. Even when central figures were captured, the organization maintained continuity through experienced operators who had studied its evolution since its earliest days. The ability to reorganize quickly after each disruption demonstrated the resilience of a system designed to survive long beyond any single individual. By this period, the Sinaloa network had become more than a trafficking group. It functioned as a vast system of transportation, finance, and international coordination. From remote mountain villages to major metropolitan cities, its influence rested on connections formed through decades of trade, negotiation, and calculated expansion. Governments across the world intensified their strategies to halt its growth. Yet the organization's adaptability, geographic reach, and intricate alliances kept it firmly embedded in the global landscape. As international cooperation intensified in the 2010s, surveillance technologies, intelligence sharing, and financial monitoring expanded in ways that reshaped the environment in which the organization operated. Authorities mapped trade routes with greater precision, intercepted communications, and targeted shipping networks across multiple continents. These efforts resulted in significant seizures and the dismantling of regional cells. Yet they also revealed how deeply embedded the organization had become in global supply systems. Each enforcement action exposed only a fraction of a network designed to operate through layers of intermediaries, allowing its core structure to remain intact even as pressure mounted. Leadership changes accelerated as high-profile arrests drew worldwide attention. When key figures were apprehended, international agencies declared decisive progress. But inside the organization, transitions unfolded with practiced efficiency. Individuals with long-standing regional authority assumed new responsibilities, ensuring continuity across border corridors and supply chains. While public perception framed these arrests as turning points, the internal structure functioned through experience accumulated over decades, enabling a consistent level of coordination that resisted collapse. This resilience became a defining element of the organization's survival during a period of intense global scrutiny. Expansion into new markets abroad reflected shifting global demand. Partnerships strengthened in Europe, where distribution routes adapted to maritime and air traffic patterns that linked Latin America to major commercial hubs. In Asia and Oceania, rising demand prompted fresh logistical strategies, including the use of intermediaries based in transshipment countries where oversight varied significantly. These international expansions required complex negotiations and financial systems capable of navigating differing legal frameworks. Yet the organization demonstrated an aptitude for adjusting to regional conditions with the same adaptability it had cultivated in Mexico. Inside Mexico, shifting alliances and rivalries continued to reshape the landscape. Territories that once seemed stable became zones of competition as emerging factions challenged established routes. In response, the organization relied on strategies that prioritized long-term influence, including agreements with local groups and selective intervention when key corridors were threatened. Border cities remained essential to its operations, and each shift in control reflected changing political climates, law enforcement initiatives, and rival movements. Through these fluctuations, the organization preserved a significant presence by maintaining relationships with transporters, intermediaries, and regional networks that had evolved alongside it for decades. Technological changes further transformed its operations. Communication systems once reliant on radios and couriers transitioned to encrypted platforms designed to reduce exposure. Financial activity became increasingly difficult to trace as revenue moved through international banking systems, digital transfers, and shell companies established in regions where oversight was limited. Sophisticated money laundering methods allowed profits to flow into real estate, agriculture, mining, hospitality, and global commerce, embedding financial influence far beyond its geographic origins. Each system operated through individuals who specialized in evasion techniques, refined over years of adapting to investigative advances. While the organization maintained a broad global network, its structure also faced internal pressures as generational shifts occurred. Veterans who had risen during the fragmented era of the late 20th century began passing responsibilities to younger figures with different strategies, connections, and ambitions. These transitions occasionally resulted in internal disputes, but the decentralized design prevented disruptions from spreading across the entire network. The structure remained capable of adjusting to new leadership dynamics, illustrating an adaptability shaped by decades of navigating external and internal challenges. Government initiatives continued to intensify, with multinational operations focusing on high-level arrests, the disruption of supply routes, and the freezing of financial assets. These efforts generated significant obstacles, yet each wave of enforcement prompted the organization to innovate further. When maritime routes were targeted, air corridors expanded. When financial tracking increased, investments shifted to sectors less vulnerable to oversight. The organization's long-term survival depended on recognizing patterns in government strategy and adapting before vulnerabilities became liabilities, a skill developed through years of observing political change across multiple countries. As rival factions across Mexico rose and fell, the organization capitalized on moments of instability to strengthen its influence. In regions where competing groups fractured due to internal disputes or government pressure, intermediaries aligned with the Sinaloa structure stepped in to restore order to trade routes. This approach reduced disruptions to supply chains, maintaining consistency that foreign partners depended on. Over time, this stability reinforced its position as one of the most reliable trafficking networks in the world, even during periods of national instability. Internationally, law enforcement cooperation reached unprecedented levels, with joint operations spanning several continents. Large-scale seizures impacted revenue, yet the decentralized nature of the organization ensured that losses were absorbed without producing systemic collapse. Production regions adapted to these challenges by relocating facilities, refining methods, and diversifying sources of raw materials. Transporters adjusted routes based on seasonal migration patterns, weather conditions, and enforcement cycles, demonstrating a strategic awareness that reflected years of accumulated experience. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, the organization's influence remained firmly established on multiple fronts. Its presence stretched from rural mountain communities to metropolitan financial centers, connected through a network built on decades of shifting alliances, logistical innovation, and international partnerships. Governments continued to apply pressure through extraditions, asset seizures, intelligence operations, and border enforcement. Yet each effort revealed the complexity of dismantling a system that operated across continents, employed thousands of intermediaries, and adapted to every new challenge with remarkable speed. Generational leadership shifts continued shaping the organization's trajectory. Younger figures brought new connections, technological awareness, and strategies tailored to evolving markets. These transitions influenced alliances, supply routes, and operational planning, often reflecting the changing landscape of global demand. While the identities and roles of certain leaders remained subjects of speculation, The organization's structure ensured continuity regardless of external attention or internal transformation. As the global landscape evolved, the organization sustained its presence through strategies rooted in flexibility rather than dominance. It preserved influence, not by controlling every territory directly, but by ensuring the consistent operation of supply chains that connected producers, transporters, distributors, and financial operators across continents. Each element of this system functioned with a level of autonomy that reduced vulnerability while maintaining coordinated movement across international borders. In the present day, the group remains one of the most studied organizations in modern criminal history, its evolution shaped by geography, political shifts, and international demand. Its endurance results from decades of adaptation to pressure, competition, and changing global markets. From the rural terrain of Sinaloa to the commercial routes linking multiple continents, its rise reflects a complex convergence of opportunity, strategy, and resilience that continues to influence regional and international dynamics.